A routine late-night traffic stop escalates immediately when the officer humiliates a black grandfather. The grandfather maintains calm dignity and answers with measured words rather than panic. A symbolic act of disrespect intensifies the tension. The chapter closes on a cliff. A powerful, unexpected figure steps into the light. "We don't hire people like you." The line struck like a thrown stone, splitting the quiet into sharp edges. Night lay thin along the highway, a strip of dark laced with the tired glow of a single street lamp. Red and blue cut through the air in pulses, painting metal and skin in quick accusations. A cruiser idled behind a small sedan. Its lights made authority feel immediate and unavoidable. The officer moved with a practiced tilt, the kind of posture learned where power is shown rather than discussed. One hand rested near his holster as if to prove that he could. His uniform sat clean. His voice was the colder part of confidence. He peered through the cracked window with the assured squint of a man who believed seeing was the same as knowing. The driver was a grandfather years, mapped in the lines of his face, patience gathered like old coats. He kept his hands on the wheel, steady and deliberate. His beard was silver, his eyes calm. There was a dignity in the way he breathed that argued with the officer's impatience. "Step out," the officer said, blunt as a commandment. License and registration. The papers came and slipped. The wallet hit gravel and scattered like a small confession. The officer let it lie. It was a small, deliberate humiliation, a ritual meant to make the man smaller. Nearby, a woman in the back leaned forward, a child half asleep in her lap. Their faces were half in shadow, fully present. The old man bent, not in supplication but with the care of someone handling relics. He gathered the wallet, smoothed the pages, brushed dirt from leather with a steady hand. The action had the patience of long work hands that had fixed roofs, built fences, mended more than just tools. "Where are you heading so late?" the officer asked, a question wrapped in accusation. Two other cruisers hummed in the periphery like a chorus trained to back a solo. Their flashlights carved slats of light against houses and hedges, turning a quiet street into a stage set. The officer's face softened into a smile that never reached his eyes. He shuffled the papers as if proof could be rearranged into guilt. He stepped on the fallen wallet, a foot pressing leather into gravel. The motion was small but meant to underline ownership. The old man did not rise in panic. He folded his hands around the wallet and pressed it to his chest like a small warmth against a winter. He looked at the officer with a clarity that demanded attention rather than asked for it. "You look at my face and decide the rest," he said, calm and measured. "You count my years as if they are debts. But I have a name and I have a right to drive these roads." There was a silence that held for a heartbeat. The officer's finger twitched near the holster habits die hard. He had been taught to read danger in shapes and not in truths. The woman in the back steadied the child. The night smelled of dust and distant rain. A radio somewhere in a house played an old tune that the wind softened into background noise. Details pooled around them, small witnesses to the exchange. The officer laughed, thin and forced. "You give me words instead of answers," he said. "Maybe you should move on." The old man's voice dropped, quieter now, pulling the air close. "I have been here longer than your radio calls," he said. "I have returned money for purchase, stood at counters, mended what needed mending. We hold history in our hands. Tonight, you won't write over it." It was not a threat so much as a promise stitched into a quieter truth. The officer shifted, the confidence wobbling. Small cracks showed first where arrogance met steadiness. Then, deliberate and almost casual, the officer bent and crushed the wallet edge with his boot, grinding leather into gravel like a punctuation. A child's faint whimper rose. The woman murmured comfort without looking at the uniform. The old man reached down, lifted the crushed wallet, and kept it close. He did not shout. He did not plead. He met the officer's gaze and spoke with a voice that carried but did not need volume. "Remember these faces," he said. "They will remember you. Not because you stopped us, but because you chose to be seen." The officer hesitated. The cruiser radio crackled. Commands and routine noise threaded the air. Down the road, headlights carved a line, and a silhouette detached itself from a limousine parked in the shadowed hedge, an unexpected figure stepping into light, the slow arrival of authority that did not belong to the uniform at his feet. The road waited, patient for what would follow. The silence of the highway felt heavier than the flashing lights. For a moment, even the crickets seemed to quiet, as if the night itself leaned closer to listen. The officer smirked, puffing out his chest, satisfied that the old man had been reduced to bending for his wallet. His shadow stretched long across the gravel, broken only when new headlights cut into the scene. From the dark limousine parked a few yards behind, the driver's door opened with slow precision. A figure emerged, tall, poised, deliberate. The soft click of polished shoes against pavement echoed strangely loud in the quiet. Whoever this was, they carried the air of authority that wasn't borrowed from a badge or a belt. The officer squinted, his arrogance twitching. "Stay where you are," he barked, pointing at the newcomer. "This is a police matter." But the man didn't stop. His walk was steady, almost regal, the kind of walk that demanded space without asking. He came closer, his face still hidden in the shadows, his presence enough to make the officer's hand twitch again near his holster. Inside the old sedan, the grandfather's daughter leaned forward, whispering to her child, "It's okay, baby. It's okay." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fixed on the man stepping closer, as if she already knew what the officer did not. The grandfather himself stood calm, his weathered face unflinching. He did not announce the man, did not explain. Instead, he allowed the silence to tighten like a noose around the officer's confidence. "Sir," the officer snapped, more desperate now, "I said this is police business." "Step back." The man finally moved into the reach of the flashing lights. His coat was tailored, his tie precise, and his face unmistakable. The governor of the state stood beneath the cruel strobe of police lights, his expression calm but edged with something colder than anger. For a split second, the officer's jaw loosened. He stumbled half a step back, then tried to recover. "Governor!" His voice cracked before he could steady it. "What are you doing here?" The governor's eyes didn't move to him immediately. They lingered on the old man instead, the grandfather who stood silent but unbroken. A small nod passed between them, not of subservience, but of recognition, like two men who had met before in some unspoken place. Only then did the governor turn toward the officer. His voice was low, steady, and cut cleaner than any shouted command. "You stopped my car." The officer swallowed hard. His earlier bravado seemed suddenly flimsy. I didn't know, sir." "The vehicle, it looked suspicious." "The driver wasn't what?" the governor asked, his words like knives laid gently on the table. The officer hesitated. His throat worked, but no answer came. He looked at the grandfather again, at the calm patience in those eyes, and realized how ridiculous his arrogance now appeared. But his pride clawed at him, refusing to let him yield fully. "I was following procedure," he muttered. The governor stepped closer, so near that the reflection of red and blue lights shimmered in his polished shoes. He leaned slightly forward, his tone cutting through the night. "Procedure doesn't involve humiliation. Procedure doesn't grind wallets into gravel. Procedure doesn't shame a man in front of his family." The silence returned. The officer's lips parted, but no words came. His fellow officers, standing near their cruisers, shifted uneasily, as though the uniform itself felt heavier on their backs. The grandfather finally spoke, his voice soft but powerful enough to bend the moment. He saw my face, not my name. The governor nodded slowly, the weight of the truth hanging in the charged air. He turned once more to the officer. "Do you know who you've stopped tonight?" The officer shook his head, unsure if he even wanted the answer. The governor's eyes narrowed. His voice, sharp and final, cut through the flashing silence. "You stopped the man who raised me." And just like that, the entire highway shifted. The governor's words hung in the night like thunder that refused to fade. "You stopped the man who raised me." For a heartbeat, the officer's chest froze mid-breath. The words carried not just authority but history, and they exposed the hollowness of his posture. The flashing red and blue, once his tools of intimidation, now painted him in harsh, unforgiving light. He shifted his stance, suddenly aware of the weight of his badge. Heavy as chains instead of honor. The grandfather didn't move. His hands rested calmly at his sides, his wallet held close. No louder than silence, but louder than every excuse the officer had ever rehearsed. His eyes were steady, and the calmness inside them cut deeper than shouting ever could. "Governor." The officer tried again, his voice scraping against nerves that no longer obeyed him. I didn't realize. I thought." "You thought you could make him small." The governor's voice was low, but it was merciless. The officer swallowed hard, but pride clawed at him still. "With respect, sir, I was following protocol. It's my job to keep the roads safe." He looked. He stopped himself before finishing, but the word suspicious hung like smoke between them. Impossible to hide. The grandfather tilted his head slightly, not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. "Suspicion is a lens you've polished for too long. Every time you see someone like me, the glass tells you what you expect. You don't see me, you only see your reflection." The officer's lips parted as though to argue, but nothing came. His silence betrayed him louder than words. Behind them, the faint glow of porch lights flickered on. Doors opened on nearby houses. A couple of neighbors, curious about the lights and noise, stepped out onto their porches. Some whispered, pointing at the unusual sight of a limousine pulled over beside a battered sedan, both drowned in police strobes. Phones appeared, screens raised like new witnesses. The officer noticed. A cold tremor shot down his spine. He had performed arrogance many times before, but never with cameras recording the cracks in his act. His hand twitched near his belt again, not out of threat this time, but out of nervous habit, as if the gun was a shield for shame. The governor stepped closer, his presence quiet but overwhelming. "I watched this man raise children with discipline and love. I watched him stand in lines where he was ignored, speak in rooms where no one wanted to hear him, and still he walked with dignity. You don't measure men by the color of their skin or the car they drive. You measure them by the weight of their silence when they've been wronged." The grandfather finally spoke again, voice deep and slow. "And silence does not mean surrender." Those words struck like a hammer against glass. The officer flinched as though hit. He tried to straighten, to salvage the authority that was slipping from him like sand through clenched fists. I didn't know," he muttered, softer now, but still wrapped in the instinct of excuse. "That's the problem," the governor said. "You never want to know. You only want to command." A breeze stirred the night air, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and gasoline. The lights of the patrol cars flickered against the windows of the houses, reflecting a distorted image of the scene, an officer unraveling, a grandfather unbent, a governor standing between history and authority. The grandfather lifted his wallet once more, holding it at eye level, dust still clinging to its edges. "This," he said softly, "is not just leather. It is years of driving to work, paying bills, carrying pictures of children who became men. It is proof of who I am. You stepped on it as though my life were just paper beneath your boot." The officer felt the eyes on him, the governor's. The grandfather's, the neighbor's glowing screens. For the first time, the badge on his chest burned rather than shone. His voice cracked when he spoke. You were only showing the world what you truly believe. The governor cut him off. And tonight, the world is watching. The officer turned. Seeing the cluster of neighbors, their phones raised, their whispers growing into murmurs. His authority had always been unquestioned in shadows, in silence, in places where no one dared to record. But under the glow of cameras, under the calm defiance of a man he had tried to humiliate, his power thinned into something fragile, almost laughable. The grandfather's final words in that moment landed heavier than any command. You wanted me to kneel and grovel. Instead, you will kneel in memory. The officer's eyes flicked to the governor, to the silent crowd, to the family inside the sedan. His chest rose and fell faster, the mask of arrogance slipping piece by piece. He was still standing, still in uniform, but the cracks in the badge had begun to show. And in those cracks, the night promised collapse. The street, once empty and still, now breathed with watching eyes. Porch lights burned brighter, doors swung open, and shadows of neighbors spilled onto lawns. The pulsing red and blue made every face look ghostly, but the glow of raised phones glimmered like torches in a silent march. The officer felt it. Authority had always been a stage play, performed in darkness, with no witnesses but those forced into silence. But now the audience had changed. Every second of arrogance, every careless insult, every cruel gesture could be carried far beyond this street, into screens, into hearts, into judgment, back inside. The officer barked, waving one hand toward the crowd. His voice was sharp, desperate to reclaim ground. This is official police business. Disperse. No one moved. The silence was defiance enough. Even children clung to their mothers' sides, wide-eyed but unmoving, unwilling to retreat from the theater unfolding in front of them. The governor stood motionless, his hands folded calmly before him. They are not your problem, he said softly, but every word struck like a verdict. Your problem is here. The officer's jaw tightened. He turned toward the grandfather, his teeth gritted against the weight of eyes upon him. You step back into the car. Now, I don't want to say it again. The grandfather did not move. He looked not at the officer, but at the crowd, the quiet faces, the glowing screens. His voice, when it came, was deep, even, and unshaken. I have spent my life being told to step back. At counters. At doors. At stations. Always stepping back. Tonight I will not. The words spread outward like ripples on water, carried by the hush of the night. The crowd shifted, leaning forward, some whispering, others holding their breath. The officer's hand twitched at his holster. Don't test me, he snapped. But his voice was less steel now, more strained rope fraying at the edges. The governor's gaze fixed on that trembling hand. You're already being tested, he said. Not by him, by the truth you've revealed. The officer glanced toward his fellow officers near the cruisers. Their shoulders were tense, their eyes uncertain. None moved to back his command. Silence had grown heavier than loyalty. A neighbor's voice cut through the stillness, soft, almost reluctant at first. I saw what he did. I saw him throw the wallet down. Another followed. I recorded it, then another. We all saw. The whispers grew, not loud, but enough to weave a chorus of truth. The officer turned, his breath shallow, his arrogance draining with every phone raised higher. He could shout commands, he could wave his badge, but the crowd had already passed judgment. The grandfather lifted the crushed wallet once more, holding it high under the flashing lights. Dust still clung to it, and its worn edges spoke louder than any accusation. This, he said, his voice steady, is what he stepped on. Not leather. Not paper. My years, my family. My name. The officer's lips trembled as though words might come, but nothing escaped. His throat locked against the weight pressing down. The governor stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper, yet stronger than the officer's shouts. "Do you understand what's happening? Power has shifted. Not because I'm here. Not because of politics. Because the truth will not kneel tonight." The officer blinked against the sting of sweat in his eyes, or was it shame? His breath came uneven, his body heavy as though his uniform itself had turned against him. The crowd murmured again, some shaking their heads, others clutching their children tighter, teaching them silently what dignity looked like in the face of arrogance. The grandfather lowered the wallet, tucking it carefully into his pocket. His hand lingered there for a moment as though sealing something sacred. Then he looked directly at the officer and said words that carved themselves into the night. "You thought no one would remember. But memory stands before you." The officer staggered a step back, the weight of eyes too much to bear. For the first time, he looked smaller than his badge, smaller than his uniform, smaller than the night that held him accountable. The silence deepened once more, a silence no command could break. And in that silence, the cracks in his authority split wider. The night no longer belonged to flashing lights or uniforms. It belonged to silence, the heavy, suffocating silence of men in blue who would not step forward. The other officers, once pillars at the edges of the scene, stood still beside their cruisers, their faces half lit by strobes. None moved. None spoke. The first officer's chest heaved, his breath ragged. He looked to them for rescue, for reinforcement, for the nod that had always come before. But their eyes avoided his. Each one stared instead at the ground, the governor, or the steady figure of the grandfather. Their silence was not loyalty. It was exposure. The governor's gaze traveled slowly across the line of officers, sharp as a blade. "Is this what you stand for?" he asked, not raising his voice, yet forcing each man to hear. "A badge that crushes wallets, not crime? A silence that defends arrogance, not justice?" One officer shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared his throat, but still none spoke. The silence itself testified louder than any words could. The grandfather breathed deeply, his eyes fixed not on the officer who had humiliated him, but on the men who now stood frozen in complicity. His voice was low, gravelly from years of use, but clear. "You know wrong when you see it, and still you choose silence. That is how wrong survives." The words struck. The officers' shoulders tensed, but their mouths remained closed. A few glanced at the crowd, at the raised phones, at the glowing screens that would soon scatter their silence across millions of eyes. The officer who had begun this all grew restless. "Say something." He barked at his colleagues, his voice breaking. "Back me up here." But no one answered. The weight of their silence pressed harder, heavier, crushing him more than any accusation. The governor stepped closer, his polished shoes catching the shimmer of the strobe lights. "Your silence," he said to the group of officers, "is an answer. It tells us everything we need to know. When wrong happens, you bow your heads. When truth rises, you vanish. That silence is your legacy." The officer's pride cracked further. Sweat pooled at his temple, his jaw clenched and unclenched. He wanted to bark another command, but even his voice felt stolen by the night. The grandfather turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the line of uniforms. "I was raised to believe that silence protects peace. But I have lived long enough to learn that silence protects only power. Tonight, you show me which one you serve." The crowd murmured in agreement, their whispers swelling into a quiet chorus. One neighbor spoke loud enough to be heard. "We see you. All of you." The officer who had humiliated the grandfather earlier shifted, his fists curling at his sides. His arrogance, once sharp as steel, now trembled like thin glass. He stared at the crowd, at the governor, at the old man who refused to bow. And in all of them, he saw himself shrinking. The governor's voice cut again, steady and merciless. A badge is not protection from truth. Tonight, truth has found you. The other officers finally stirred, but only to step back. Their retreat was not loud, not dramatic, but it was clear. None moved to shield their colleague. None moved to silence the governor. None moved to erase the grandfather's dignity. They stepped back, leaving him alone in the harsh glow of headlights. For the first time, the officer felt truly abandoned. The badge on his chest burned as though it were a brand. The silence of his colleagues was louder than any betrayal. The grandfather's eyes met his, calm but unyielding. You thought your silence would bury me. Instead, it has buried you. The words settled into the night, final and inescapable. The officer's breath shook. His hands twitched uselessly at his sides. For years, silence had been his shield, his safety, the unspoken agreement between men in uniform. But tonight, that silence had shifted sides. It stood with truth, not with him. And in that silence, the system cracked wider. The night's air felt different now, no longer heavy with fear, but electric with possibility. The crowd, once hesitant to breathe too loud, now stirred with growing confidence. Mothers with children clutched their little ones closer, not in fear, but as witnesses to something historic. Fathers, brothers, and strangers shifted closer to the scene, their eyes glowing with defiance under the flicker of blue and red lights. The officer stood alone, abandoned by the very silence that had always shielded him. His hands fidgeted, his jaw tight. His badge, once polished pride, now felt like a weight dragging him down. He had barked orders for years, and men had obeyed. Tonight, his words carried no power, no echo. The governor watched him, arms behind his back, his posture regal and unshaken. "You think a badge gives you strength?" he said, voice cutting across the night like a blade. "A badge means nothing when it is pinned to a hollow man." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You don't know me," he snapped, though his tone cracked. The grandfather's voice rose slowly, steady as stone. "We don't need to know your name. We see your actions. And actions carve truth deeper than any badge can hide," the crowd murmured, their voices spreading the old man's words like wildfire. "Actions carve truth," someone repeated. Another voice joined, "Deeper than a badge." The whispers swelled into chants, not yet thunderous, but enough to shake the stillness. The officer looked around, panic flickering in his eyes. "Shut them up!" He barked at his colleagues, but none moved. Their silence had shifted into quiet complicity with the crowd. The governor stepped forward, his shadow falling across the officer. "No, let them speak. For too long, your voice has drowned theirs. Tonight, their voices drown yours." The officer's pride fractured further. He turned toward the grandfather, desperate to reclaim some control. "You think this changes anything? Tomorrow the system will still be mine." The grandfather did not flinch. He adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of his words. "You mistake the system for eternity. Systems fall, but truth—" He paused, his gaze steady. "Truth walks slower, but it never stops walking." The crowd erupted into applause, their hands clapping like drums against the night. For the first time, the officer's uniform looked less like authority and more like a costume of disguise unraveling, thread by thread. One of the younger officers shifted uneasily, his lips parting. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might speak. The older officer shot him a warning glare, but the hesitation had been seen by all. Another crack in the shield. The governor turned toward the younger man. "You have a choice tonight," he said firmly. "Stand with silence or step toward truth. History will remember whichever you choose." The young officer swallowed hard, sweat glistening on his forehead. He didn't move, but the weight of the decision lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. The disgraced officer scoffed, trying to mask his unraveling pride. These people, they'll forget. They always forget. The grandfather shook his head, his voice low but uncheckable. We forget small wounds, but we never forget the cut that bleeds us all. Phones lifted higher in the crowd, recording every breath, every word. The officer realized, perhaps for the first time, that forgetting was no longer an option. The world was watching. His arrogance trembled into desperation. He took a step forward, pointing at the grandfather. Enough! You don't get the last word here. But the old man simply smiled, weary but unbroken. Son, he said, voice rich with calm power, I already did. The words settled into the night, irreversible. The crowd's cheer roared louder this time, spilling into the silence like a flood. The officer's face twisted, his authority crumbling in real time, and in that moment, the cracks in his badge became visible to all. The flashing lights painted the night in restless strokes of red and blue, but it was no longer the cruisers that owned the street. It was the people. Their phones lit the scene like 1,000 small suns, each one recording, archiving, immortalizing. What once would have vanished in silence was now cemented in memory. The officer felt those eyes like iron chains around his chest. He shifted his stance, but every movement seemed clumsy, exaggerated. His hands twitched, searching for authority, but his authority had dissolved under the scrutiny of witnesses. The grandfather stood unbent, his shadow long and steady against the asphalt. He did not raise his voice, did not move with force, yet his presence filled every corner. Where the officer looked fragile under the cameras, the old man looked eternal. The governor turned, addressing not only the officer but the crowd. Tonight, we bear witness. This moment will not vanish into reports or fade into whispers. Every eye here has become a page in history. Every phone, a pen. And history will not bend to protect arrogance. The crowd answered with a cheer, their voices rolling like thunder. The officer flinched at the sound. For years, crowds had been shadows, faceless and silent. Now, they were the storm. A woman from the crowd shouted, "We see you." A man added, "We're not afraid anymore." The officer's lips tightened. His gaze darted to his colleagues, but still none moved. Their silence pressed harder than the chants. It was betrayal, but also revelation. The system did not protect him. It only tolerated him until truth arrived. The grandfather lifted his hand slowly, not in anger, but in gesture. The chant softened, the crowd leaning closer to hear his voice. "All my life," he began, his words heavy with age and experience, "I have carried the weight of silence. I have walked with it, slept with it, prayed with it. But tonight, I will not carry it alone. Tonight, you carry it with me." The crowd erupted, their voices now fierce and uncontainable. They chanted his words back at him, "We carry it with you," until the street trembled with solidarity. The officer shook his head violently, as if trying to scatter their voices. "This is nonsense," he barked. This is chaos." But the governor cut through his protest. "No, officer. This is order, the kind you could never create. True order is not silence forced by fear, but voices rising in dignity." The officer's chest rose and fell rapidly. His world, built on command and compliance, was crumbling brick by brick. He had always relied on silence, on blank reports, on unspoken protection. But tonight, silence had turned into noise. Deafening, undeniable noise. One of the younger officers finally stepped forward, his boots scraping against the asphalt. The entire crowd went still, every lens shifting to him. His voice trembled but carried. "Sir, I can't stand by this anymore. The words pierced the night like lightning. Gasps spread through the crowd. Even the governor raised his chin slightly, watching the moment unfold. The disgraced officer's eyes widened in disbelief. "What did you say?" The younger man swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I said, this isn't right." "None of it." His hand shook, but his voice steadied. "He didn't deserve this." "None of them do." The crowd exploded in cheers, their voices shaking the buildings around them. The chants shifted into something stronger, sharper. They called the young officer's courage out loud, chanting his name when someone from the crowd asked it. The disgraced officer staggered backward, his foundation cracking. His shield of silence was shattered, not just by the crowd, but from within his own ranks. The grandfather nodded slowly, a faint smile crossing his face. "It takes one voice," he murmured, "to turn silence into truth." The governor's eyes swept across the officers, daring them to follow. Some looked down, others turned away, but the first step had already been taken. The system was no longer whole, it was bleeding from the inside. The disgraced officer stood alone, trembling, drowning in the weight of witnesses, and the night refused to look away. The air on the street felt alive, charged with the tension of something irreversible. What began as a confrontation between one officer and an old man had swelled into a trial before hundreds, with cameras as jurors and truth as the judge. The younger officer's words still echoed in the night. "I can't stand by this anymore." His declaration had pierced the silence, splitting the line of uniforms into fragments. Some looked ready to follow him. Others clenched their jaws, fighting the urge to break. But none could erase what had been said. The disgraced officer's eyes burned with fury. He stepped forward, veins pulsing in his neck. "You think you can betray your brothers?" He spat at the younger man. "You'll regret this. We protect each other, always." The younger officer, pale but steady, shook his head. "We protect the law, not lies." The crowd roared, their voices rising in waves. "Protect the law, not lies." They chanted, their words crashing against the officer like hammers against glass. The disgraced officer turned, face red, teeth clenched. His voice cracked under desperation. "You don't understand. Without us, this city falls apart. Without fear, there is no order." The governor's voice cut sharp through the noise. "Fear is not order. Fear is rot. And tonight that rot is spilling out of you." The officer's breath quickened. He could feel control slipping faster than he could catch. He reached for his radio, but the gesture looked weak, meaningless under the glow of cameras. No backup would save him now, not from truth, not from witnesses. The grandfather stepped closer, his slow, deliberate movements commanding attention. His cane clicked against the pavement, each sound a reminder of time, of endurance, of survival. He looked the officer in the eye. "You wanted me small. You wanted me silent. But look around you, son. I am neither. And neither are they." The crowd thundered agreement, clapping, chanting, filling the night with a sound the officer could not stop. The officer's composure cracked. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted, his words almost drowned by the chants. "Tomorrow, I'll still wear this badge. Tomorrow, I'll still—" The governor raised a hand, silencing the crowd for a moment. His voice was calm but carved in steel. "No, tomorrow your badge will be a scar. A reminder of the night's silence turned its back on you." The officer's chest heaved. His hand twitched toward the younger officer as if tempted to shove him, to reassert control. But the crowd's lenses caught every flicker, every shadow of movement. He froze, realizing that even his anger was no longer his weapon. It was evidence. The younger officer took a single step forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with the grandfather. His voice rang clear. "You don't scare me anymore." Gasps rippled through the crowd, then cheers. The disgraced officer staggered back a step, his authority collapsing like a wall of sand against waves. The grandfather leaned on his cane, his gaze piercing. "You built your power on fear. But fear is fickle. It runs the moment courage enters the room. And courage is here now." The words landed with the weight of prophecy. The officer's face twisted, torn between rage and helplessness. His hands curled into fists, but he did not swing. He couldn't. Every movement was a nail in his own coffin. The governor stepped in close, lowering his voice so it cut like a whisper against stone. "Your breaking point isn't coming tomorrow. It's here, tonight, right now." The officer's breathing grew ragged. For years he had stood unchallenged, his arrogance untouchable. Now, surrounded by witnesses, by truth, by courage, he felt something foreign, something he had only inflicted on others. Fear. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence, once his shield, had turned against him. It was no longer protection, it was proof. And under the weight of eyes, voices, and truth, the officer finally broke. The street was no longer a street. It had become a courtroom without walls, a stage without curtains. The flashing police lights were the torches, the phones were the pens, and the crowd was the jury. What began with a single stop had now swollen into a reckoning. The disgraced officer's face was damp with sweat, his hands twitching, his eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an escape. But there was none. He had worn the badge like armor, believing it invincible. Now that same badge burned against his chest, a brand marking his collapse. The governor took a deliberate step forward, his polished shoes echoing against the cracked pavement. His voice rang out, steady, undeniable. "You wanted power through silence, but silence has abandoned you. Look around, your shield is gone. Your brothers stand back, your badge shrinks under the light, and this man you tried to humiliate stands taller than you've ever been." The officer tried to bark back, but his throat betrayed him. His voice cracked. You don't understand the streets. You don't understand what it takes to keep people in line." The grandfather lifted his head slowly, his weathered face glowing in the pale light. His words flowed with the calm of rivers that had cut stone. "In line?" he repeated. "You call it keeping us in line. I call it crushing souls. But souls don't break easy. They rise when you least expect." The crowd cheered, their voices swelling. "Rise! Rise! Rise!" they shouted, stamping their feet against the pavement like a drumbeat. The officer's face twisted. "This is chaos," he spat, but his words rang hollow, swallowed by the chants. The governor's eyes narrowed, his voice slicing sharper. "No, this is justice. Chaos is what you created. Every time you hid behind silence, every time you bent the law to feed your pride. Tonight, the mask is gone. Tonight, everyone sees you." The officer's knees trembled. He wanted to retreat, but the crowd closed in, not with violence, but with the force of truth. Phones hovered like lanterns, capturing every flicker of his fear. The younger officer stepped forward again, standing closer to the grandfather. His face was pale, but his spine was straight. "We swore an oath," he said, his voice steady. "Not to men like you. To the people. To the law. And I won't betray that again." Gasps rippled through the officer's line. A second younger cop shifted uneasily, then took half a step forward. It was small, but the crowd saw it. And once seen, it could not be unseen. The disgraced officer spun on them, rage flashing. "Cowards! All of you!" His voice cracked under its own weight. "Do you think the system cares about them?" He jabbed a finger toward the crowd. "Without us, they're nothing. Nothing." The grandfather's eyes glimmered. He leaned slightly on his cane, the click against the pavement sounding like judgment itself. You see? Even in your collapse you reveal the truth. You never served us. You only served yourself. The crowd roared again, louder now, their voices pounding in waves. Some cried. Some shouted. Some raised their fists. But all of them stood as one. The governor extended his hand toward the crowd, then toward the silent officers. This is your chance. Tonight you decide who you are. Silent enforcers of arrogance or witnesses of truth. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every breath, every heartbeat, every flicker of light stretched the moment. Then, the second younger officer finally stepped forward, his boots loud on the pavement. He joined the first, standing by the grandfather. The crowd erupted in cheers, a tidal wave of sound that shook the disgraced officer's fragile shell. His hands rose in protest, his voice shrieking above the chants. No, no, you don't get to choose them over me. I made you. I trained you. I gave you everything. The younger officer's reply was calm, cold. You gave us nothing but shame. The words sliced deeper than any chant. The officer's face collapsed, his jaw trembling, his eyes wide. He stumbled back a step, then another. As if the pavement itself rejected him, the grandfather's voice rose once more, calm but unrelenting. Arrogance is a house built on sand. And tonight, before all eyes, the tide has come. The officer's breath hitched. He looked at the governor, at the grandfather, at the crowd, at the officers now breaking away from his shadow. His empire of fear was gone. His silence was gone. His pride was gone. And for the first time in years, he looked small. Not powerful. Not feared. Small. The governor's voice sealed the moment. Your collapse is not punishment, it is truth. You built your life on lies, and lies cannot carry the weight of witnesses. Tonight, the world does not watch you fall. It watches truth rise. The crowd thundered, a sea of voices chanting, "Truth! Truth! Truth!" The officer covered his ears as if the chants were daggers. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees on the hard pavement, the badge glinting one last time before seeming to lose all its shine. The camera zoomed in, capturing the image that would live far beyond the night, a man who had ruled with arrogance, crumbling before the power of dignity, courage, and truth. And as the chants filled the night sky, the old grandfather stood tall, his cane steady, his presence eternal. The officer remained on his knees, gasping, broken beneath the flood of voices that no longer feared him. His badge caught the headlights one last time, its gleam no longer pride but proof of the arrogance that had collapsed in front of the world. Around him, the chants rolled like thunder, steady and unstoppable. Truth, truth. The governor did not gloat. He did not smile. His face was carved with solemnity because he understood that this night was not victory, it was revelation. Slowly, he stepped toward the officer, his footsteps loud against the pavement. He stopped just inches away, his shadow falling over the kneeling man. You wanted obedience, the governor said, his voice clear. But what you got was truth. And truth does not kneel to arrogance. The officer looked up, his lips trembling. For the first time, he seemed less like a predator and more like a frightened child. His hands shook as he muttered, You don't know what it's like out here. You don't know what I carried." The grandfather's voice cut gently through the storm. "You carried pride, not people. And tonight, pride is too heavy for you." The officer's eyes glistened, though whether from rage or shame, no one could tell. His words tangled in his throat, unfinished, unconvincing. The younger officers stood beside the grandfather, silent but resolute. Their presence alone spoke louder than words. They had chosen truth over silence. The crowd saw them, honored them. lifted their names in chants that spread like fire. The governor turned to the people, raising his hand for quiet. Slowly the chant softened until the night was filled only with the hum of anticipation. "Listen well," he said. "Tonight does not end with this man on his knees. Tonight begins with all of you standing for truth, standing for dignity, standing so silence can never again be mistaken for order." The crowd erupted, clapping, shouting, crying. Some hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces. Others raised their children high on their shoulders, as if to let them witness history firsthand. The grandfather lifted his cane, tapping it once on the pavement. The sound was small, but it silenced even the loudest voices. "Hear me," he said, his voice weary yet strong. "Do not let this night be only memory. Let it be seed. Seeds only matter if they grow. Plant courage in your homes, in your schools, in your streets. Plant it so deep that no silence can ever smother it again." The crowd listened, spellbound. His words sank into the night like roots, finding soil in every heart. The disgraced officer lowered his head, unable to meet their eyes. The chants returned, but now they were no longer about him. They were about the future. The crowd shouted not in anger, but in unity. Their voices rose as a hymn. No more silence. No more fear. Truth will rise. The governor gestured to the younger officer who had first spoken. "You were the first crack in silence," he said firmly. "Do not underestimate what that means. One voice can move the immovable." The young man nodded, tears pooling but unshed. He stood taller, as though carrying the weight of both shame and hope. The grandfather looked at the officer one last time. "You thought this was about me," he said quietly. "But it was about all of us. And all of us stood tonight." The officer's lips parted, but no words came. His silence was no longer power. It was his prison. The governor finally turned away, signaling to the others. "Take him in. Not because we hate him, but because justice cannot wait another night." Two officers, neither eager, but both resolute, moved forward and took the disgraced man by the arms. He did not resist. His legs trembled as they lifted him, guiding him toward the cruiser. For the first time, the cuffs he had so often used on others closed around his own wrists. Gasps swept the crowd. Then, cheers. Not cheers of cruelty, but of relief. They watched not a man's downfall, but a system beginning to answer for itself. The grandfather leaned against his cane, his eyes on the horizon where night still lingered. "The dawn will come," he whispered, though the crowd still heard. "And when it does, let it find us standing, not kneeling." The governor placed a hand gently on the old man's shoulder. "It will," he promised. The cruisers began to roll away, but the flashing lights no longer looked like threats. They looked like signals beacons announcing that silence had been broken. The crowd lingered, unwilling to leave. Some sang softly. Some prayed aloud. Others simply held their children tighter. But none forgot. The old man finally spoke again, his voice a fading echo. "Arrogance collapses. Dignity remains. Remember that." And with those words, the night closed not in despair, but in promise.